Hello everybody, Mr. Akins here and welcome to What's on the Comic Rack. In this video I'm going to be participating in Comic Collector Geek's Friday Challenge, finding ads on the back of comics. Now every Friday Alan from Comic Collector Geek puts out a challenge. Sometimes it's finding pools, sometimes it's finding robots. Most of them are finding these things on the cover. This time we're looking at the back of comics and looking at the ads that appear in the back of comics. I try my best to participate in these Friday challenges, but sometimes some are more challenging than others. What I've done is I've actually set myself a time limit. Once Alan puts out the challenge and I see it at whatever time, I set myself a timer for an hour. I don't want to spend more than an hour trying to find these covers, because one time I spent 2 or 3 hours, all of a sudden I'm looking through all my long boxes and 2 or 3 hours have passed by looking for pool covers, and all that time I found one pool cover. The ads challenge was pretty easy. I knew I had some in the back of my mind, but then you start looking through your long boxes and what you thought was going to be easy became a little bit more difficult, because I had specific ads I knew I wanted to showcase. I was able to find some of them and some of them I wasn't, but we're going to now look not at the covers of these comics, but the backs of the covers and see what marketing has to offer for us. So here we go. 10 comic book ads on the back of comics. This Spalding ad I definitely remember as a kid. There were a lot of comics that had this ad on the back. This is a 1979 Spalding street ball ad featuring Rick Barry and Dr. J. A lot of comic books I was collecting at the time had this ad on the back, and I loved the comic panels. It was almost like reading another comic, and I definitely remember this ad being on the back. I wasn't a big basketball player, but I definitely remember this ad as a kid. Another ad I definitely remember seeing on the back of comics were Legos. I had Legos when I was a kid, so a lot of these ads I'm going to show, a lot of this stuff I actually bought or I actually owned. So some of these ads I think may have been actually effective. I know this is on the back of my Avengers Annual number 10 I bought when I was 12 years old, and I remember this ad appearing on a lot of comic books at that time. I remember I had some Legos and I actually traded those Legos for comics. My mom was a little perturbed at me for doing that, and after that I seemed to start looking for jobs or doing things around the house to make some money so that I could actually buy the comics without trading it for things that she felt were more expensive than the comics I was trading for. Alan from Comic Collector Geek actually showcased this ad in his video, and I had to showcase it again because I actually bought these soldiers from this ad on the back of comics. I remember cutting it out, mailing it off, and getting these soldiers in this little locker box. They were extremely thin plastic, and they certainly weren't worth, even at that time, that $1.98 you paid for them. Now, they had these toy soldiers. They also had Roman soldiers. I never bought the Roman soldiers, but I did buy the Revolutionary War soldiers. They weren't the thin plastic like the toy soldiers were, but I couldn't find the Revolutionary War ones. I couldn't find an ad. I know I've got a comic book with that ad. All these products are from Lucky Products. I've looked that up, and they all started appearing, these ads, about 1981. So any comic you can find from about 1981 will probably have these types of ads, either the 100-piece toy soldiers, the Roman soldiers, or the Revolutionary War soldiers. Alan from Comic Collector Geek showed a milk ad with Spider-Man on it. There was a time period where there was a lot of these milk ads coming out. It had Spider-Man, I remember it had Superman, had a bunch of different people with the milk mustache. I'm not surprised Alan from Comic Collector Geek didn't show this one. Revealing outfits and undead, that's right up Alan's alley. This is my favorite of those milk mustache ads on the back of comics. I was a big Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan, and I always like to see an ad with Sarah Michelle Gellar in a revealing outfit. Risk. Who doesn't play, or who hasn't played Risk? I remember seeing these ads on the back, and I played Risk as a kid. We were playing Risk, Stratego, things like that. So I definitely remember the ads for Risk on the back of comics. There were a lot of games that were advertised on the back of comics. I had a lot that had video games on the back. I decided not to show any of those. I decided to show this one because I definitely owned Risk. Another thing that I owned as a kid was this Evil Knievel. I remember getting this one Christmas and just loving it. Had both the motorcycle and the little rocket. And I remember having that motorcycle. You put Evil Knievel on the motorcycle, you put him in this little base, and the base would shoot him off. He would jump over things, of course crash. It was great. I loved it. And here's the little base that you would use, and you would put it in that base. It would rev him up and he'd shoot off. This is another thing that I got, maybe not because of the ad, but I remember actually owning one of those. I also remember it was one of these situations where you could pose him on the stunt cycle, but again, most of it was just getting him to jump over things, getting the little base, revving him up, and shooting him off, and seeing what he could jump over. We showed off Risk. Other ads that I constantly saw on the back of comics was for all the role-playing games. And D&D was something I definitely played all through the 80s, all through the 90s. And in fact, I still play some D&D today. Some of my friends get together on the weekends and we play some D&D and other role-playing games. This was advertising Ravenloft, which this right here is a second edition. And I remember I was the DM for this Ravenloft campaign that we were going through in college. Definitely brings back the nostalgia looking at this ad. Vampires, ghosts, and things that go bump in the night. Love playing some second edition D&D. Speaking of role-playing games, Marvel Superheroes role-playing game. I couldn't find the ad that I wanted, but I did find this one. This one was about 1987, 1988. We would play any role-playing game in the 80s that came out, whether it was Villains and Vigilantes, D&D, Marvel Superheroes role-playing game, DC role-playing game, you name it, we played it. Gamma World, we would play some role-playing games, and sometimes the weirder the better. I definitely remember playing Marvel Superheroes role-playing game, and we would convert DC characters into Marvel, and it gave us a chance to play our own Marvel characters. It was great. This isn't the ad that I was thinking of, but I'm glad I found this one, so I had a representation of Marvel Superheroes role-playing game. And a final ad I remember as a kid on the back were these for Dungeons and Dragons. Again, it was set up as a comic panel, and this one went along with other ones. It was almost like a continuation of the story, and I loved it. I loved the art, and it was just a great ad for Dungeons and Dragons at a perfect time when I was playing the game as a kid. Looks like this ad came out in 1981. And there you have it. The ads I remember as a kid on the back of comics. I like to thank Comic Collector Geek for his Friday challenges. It always gives me something different that I can showcase in my collection, and this was definitely different. So until next time, maybe we can look at the fronts of comics. We'll see you around the comic rack.